Thank you, Kimete, for agreeing on this interview. This is Kimete Mitrovica Basha. We are in Brussels. It's the 25th of February, 2026. And we're going to do this interview in English, although Kimete is fluent in Albanian, and she's going to explain why.
Well, I think our first contact was in English, and while I know your Albanian is perfect, and mine also, I just felt that the natural way to speak together would make me feel more comfortable, more relaxed with you, is to speak in English. So I'm grateful to you that you've accepted to do that with me. So yes, it's just because it makes me feel more relaxed, and being interviewed is important, but I want to be able to express myself without feeling constrained.
Thank you. Can we start from the beginning? Where and when were you born? And can you tell us a little bit more about your family and your childhood?
I was one of 7 children. I'm the second daughter of 4 daughters with 3 brothers. We were all born in Australia, all of us born between 1952 and 1960, 7 children in that period. We were raised in a post-war period. We were raised in a country that was receiving refugees that were not from England, not that they were, but let's just say the nature of the immigration to Australia at that time began to change, because up till then they were receiving only the British, basically. But the war period, of course, created a dramatic situation where they accepted from the countries that would fall behind the Iron Curtain. And so Albanians were accepted. And my parents went there. It's a long story why they went there, but it's not a particularly interesting story. And so we were raised in a country that was having difficulty assimilating this new form of immigration and would not recognize basically what they could bring. So my parents, both of them highly educated, my father with 2 degrees, doctoral degrees, was refused work, for example, at the university, and he subsequently became a laborer, as he put in my birth certificate, and worked in various menial jobs, which led, frankly, to my family dealing with exclusion. I dealt with exclusion very early, with not even with almost brutal racism, actually, and with this feeling that we didn't actually belong. So for me, being raised in Australia, while I was a happy child, I was also witness to great injustice. And that injustice has actually is the seed of who I have become and who I am today.
Well, may I ask, which you said it's not very interesting as a story, but I'd be interested in knowing, how did your parents get to Australia as Albanians?
Well, my mother was in a camp at the end of the Second World War. My father was not. My father, I think he made a choice not to, and partly because his uncle from his mother's side, Jafar Deva, had worked with the Germans. So I think it was a moral decision not to go into the camps. I never had that conversation with him, so I don't know. I'm just assuming that. So at some point, and I don't exactly know how, my mother and my father were in Syria, in Damascus. So in 1948, 49, they were both there. A huge group of Albanians were there. And my father met my mum and fell in love, and 6 months later they were married. And then there was, the refugees were being dispersed across the various places in the world that was receiving these communities and these refugees. And originally, my father had been given permission to immigrate to America. But, and this is just how life is and how incredible life can be sometimes, my father had a hernia and he needed to have an operation. So he had the operation, but in the meantime, his chance to leave to go to America had passed. That was the first element. The second element was that my father had no family in exile. My grandmother, his sister, etc., were in Albania. My mother's father, and was with them. So my grandfather was sent to Australia, and my mother was very close to her father. So my father, I think, first of all, the opportunity to go to America was now in question. And my mother was grieving the fact that she was going to lose that connection with her father. So my father, I think it was an act of love, decided to, okay, then we'll go with the grandfather. I'll let her have her family since I won't have mine. And so they went to Australia. I think I'm sort of happy, actually, that they didn't go to America. But it was still an ill-fated decision because their life in Australia was so difficult, so very, very difficult. So that's the story.
Where in Australia were you born and where did you live?
I was born in Melbourne, in the south. It was very British. It still is the most British of the Australian cities. Very gracious, very conservative. I was born in Melbourne. I was very happy. It's very interesting, the paradox. I saw so much pain and loss. I lived with an exile community, nostalgic, longing, exclusion, loss of identity. I understood this without really understanding it then. I felt it, that there was sadness in this community. But I lived in a sunburnt country, I had space, I could play outside, I had a feeling of great bigness, the way that Australia's sun was so generous and sky so high. And as a child, I didn't really understand. I felt something. I really felt it when I would watch my father come home from work. I would always watch him come home from work.
We were talking about this nostalgia and the longing for it.
Yes.
But you were born in Australia, and how did you come in contact with Albanian culture? You were living in an exile community.
Yes.
But what did you hear? What did you know? What did you learn about Albanian culture or your family history?
I didn't learn very much about my family history, not till later. But Albanian culture, we were in Albanian home. We were an extended family situation. We were living with my grandparents, my uncle also, my mother's half-brother, and his 4 children. And we were living together. We had codes, when my grandfather came into the room, we stood up. When we ate, the children ate together and the parents watched us, but we were 11 children living together at some point, It's a little community. Albanian was the language of the home. Albanian food was the food we ate. We didn't eat fish and chips. We ate pite and pasul, We were taught the codes, We were hospitality, the way we greeted our guests, the way we I suppose, even though that would change later, we were told to not talk, listen. We had responsibilities, even as children, that every member in the family had a role to play. I don't know, I think we were just nourished with the music, with the language, with the food, with the sense of belonging to that community. So I was deeply rooted, even though I didn't really comprehend that. It just was. And I lived in perfect harmony with that and with my Australian friendships and the world outside. I think that I understood early, although I think I couldn't have articulated it, that I had to build connections with that community because it would have been a form of internal exile if I hadn't. So I quickly connected with my friendships and they became extremely important to me. I'm loyal in friendship even today, but I think those early friendships are really important. And but when I went home, I was the good Albanian girl, and I stayed the good Albanian girl because I think as I grew older, I felt it was important not to disappoint my parents because they'd had so many disappointments. So I was a very good Albanian girl. And but I lived in perfect harmony with the world outside. It's very interesting. I had a very happy schizophrenic experience. Yes.
Yeah. I'm curious because you talk about your father being educated in Italy, in Bologna. Because I'm Italian, I'm just curious, how did he end up there? What did he tell you anything about his experience in Italy?
I know a little bit about that period. My grandfather, Dervish Mitrovica, was very close to Fanoli. They were very, very close friends. And in fact, there was this idea in the family, and I think it may be rooted in truth, that Fanoli was my father's godfather. They're very close. And my grandfather was associated really with the anti-Zogist movement. So he actually went he went with Issa Bulottini to Tirana, not the 28th, the 29th, because the Serbs had stopped them on their journey down to Vlora. But they got there on the 29th, and then my grandfather was part of Noli's government and so on. But when Zog came to power, they went into exile. And my grandfather went to Croatia, Tsar, where actually he had a little shop. And this is a military man, you know. And my father was educated in the Jesuit schools, and then he went, I think because of the Croatian, like, you know, Austria and so on, he went to study. His university studies were done in an Italian university, Bologna. And I think Bologna, because even then, Bologna was associated more with the forward-thinking, liberal education, you know. So he did a law degree there actually, and did a doctoral studies afterwards. So that's how he got there, and he was very, very rooted, you know. I think I mentioned to you at some point that, you know, opera and all these things were part of our life. He would sing from arias and things. He spoke Italian beautifully, wrote it, lived it, I think. He had great affection for his, as we all do, for the years at university, you know. But that's how we got there, because my grandfather was in exile. And so it's funny, isn't it? The story of exile is a common theme in generation after generation. They go back and then they leave again. They go back and they leave again. Now I've gone back, and hopefully we won't have to close doors again, you know. Yeah.
When did you go to Albania or Kosovo first in your life? I mean, because
the first time I went to Albania was in April of 1991. We had in December of 1990, we were contacted. My husband and I, Idris Basha and I, were contacted by the founding members of the democratic movement in Albania. Beton Suroi, knowing about our political activity during the 80s, had told them when they were looking for help that there is a couple in Brussels who will support you, and they got our contact details. It's quite a story, because they called 1 o'clock in the morning, and probably because that's when they could get connection, because it was so uncertain, the telephone connection. But they called, and it was very exciting for us. They're amazing that we're talking to Tirana, and they are asking us for help. And so we did that. My husband and I organized immediately a visit for the first delegation of the Democratic Party to Paris to meet with all the major political parties there, basically to get help to organize the first elections. And of course, here in Brussels at the European Parliament. So that was February. We brought them in February. Very successful, very, very exciting period. And then they invite us to go to Albania for the first Congress of the Democratic Party, which was taking place in April. And so my first visit to Albania was in April 1991. My first journey to Kosovo happened in 2016. In the meantime, of course, I'd met and worked with Rugova, and he had told me, to come back and to do this and to do that. But the circumstances were always very complicated. Also, for family reasons, my husband had grown very ill, and it was difficult to leave him. But in 2016, my husband had recently passed away, and Mitrovica organized a kind of conference to mark the 100th anniversary of my father's birth, Jalal Mitrovica. So my older sister Lolita, my brother Dervish, and I traveled to Kosovo. And that was something really. That was really even more meaningful than the first trip to Albania. I didn't make a distinction between Albania and Kosovo. I was raised in a family and in a home where there was no distinction. But something about being in Kosovo and being in Mitrovica moved me so deeply. It really did. So I sensed that my connection with Kosovo would be deeper and more meaningful, and that I would make a greater commitment to it. I sensed that my history was not a burden, it was a wealth in Kosovo. Because in Albania, every time people mentioned Gjaferdeva, somehow I became implicated in the German occupation period, So I felt that there was always this sort of fear about that, people making judgments and implicating me in those, where that didn't happen in Kosovo. They really didn't, they engaged with me in a generous way, in a very respectful way. And even when they had their issues with the Gjaferdeva's period, but I didn't feel implicated, I never met him. So,
but you didn't go there to celebrate Gjaferdeva.
No, I
went
went
there to celebrate your Jalal.
That's right.
Jalal
And that was
Mitrovica.
so meaningful to me, Anna, because you've already sensed my connection to my father is very, very deep. I have great respect for him. So, as well as love, of course. So to go there and see that he mattered, and that he was returned, at least in my psyche, to a place where he should have and could have been, rather than this man who woke up at 5 and came home at 5 in the evening to feed his 7 children in incredible hardship. I was just so jubilatory and so celebratory and so fulfilling, and so I felt he had been redeemed, and somehow me too with him. So no, it was a very meaningful trip, but it was 91 for Albania and 2016 for Kosovo.
What were they celebrating about your father? What role were they celebrating him for?
Just his birthday, and they were mentioning my father was a journalist and was the founder of the Radio Pristina, Pristina, the first radio program. The building's still there. He was during the period of the Second World War, he represented Kosovo in the parliament, ethnic parliament. So he derived from a family of service with my grandfather, commitment to the protecting Albanian language, territorial integrity. All these issues were part of the heritage. But then, of course, this anti-communist sort of engagement too. So they were celebrating the man and the. I think he was celebrating also the family, but they were celebrating his vision for Kosovo, which is now a debatable one, But I think that's what they were doing, and we were invited to do that. It was interesting when we were there. My brother Dervish doesn't speak Albanian very well. He speaks it better now. We're talking 10 years later, and he's studied it. He's really committed to learning it. And there, we were received by the mayor, and we were sitting around a table, and somebody around the table, when Dervish was talking, said, whispered to the man next to him, "Look at this, Dervish Mitrovica's grandson can't speak Albanian." But my brother understood Albanian. And he turned to him with this aplomb, which I was so proud of. And he said, "I may not speak the language, but I may not be able to communicate to you in Albanian, but I am Albanian, and I am here as the son of Jalal Mitrovica, and I care about that," something like that, but he refused the judgment. I thought it was really brave of him, So it was an exciting time. Well, I've been lucky. I've lived through exciting times.